Being born into the Lawrence clan was an embarrassment. The sins your family committed in the past were heinous, to say the least. It was common for the city of Mondstadt to let the Lawrence clan know what they thought of them, especially since most members of your family still had the mentality of the old nobility. The only exception was your sister Eula, but she left you to fend for yourself after she joined the Knights of Favonius. Was it any surprise, then, that as soon as you felt something like compassion, or at the very least interest in you from someone outside your family, that you embraced it with both arms? The Fatui, an organization under the banner of the Tsaritsa, the Archon of Snezhnaya. They took you in, forged you into the person you had become. You worked under the charismatic Il Dottore. In fact, he was the one who had shown the initial interest in you. Luckily, your lack of moral compass made you useful to him. That was the only reason you avoided him using you for human experiments. But also your interest in the old world, especially the Ruin Guards, gave you a right to exist. You spent years under him, assisting whenever he saw fit, until one day the Tsaritsa herself demanded an audience with you. She did not reprimand you. In fact, she was pleased with your performance, making you responsible for Dottore's quick progress in the study of the Ruin Guards. You were honored by her words, but your pleased grin turned into a frown quickly. Thankfully, your mask covered up your entire face. When the Cryo Archon requested you'd go back to Mondstadt, you had dreaded returning there. Having read Senora's report about the Gnosis, the tensions between the knights, and worst of all, the assassination attempt towards a traveler your sister prevented, and the many blacked out parts in the second half of that same report. However, you were glad when she said the word Dragonspine. So at least you wouldn't have to go into the lion's den that was the City of Freedom. But more importantly, the Tsaritsa offered you a present most kindly. Your own delusion. It glowed with the raw destructive power of 1,000 earthquakes. While on the carriage towards the Mondstadian border, you couldn't peel your eyes from the stone. Eventually, however, they stopped. "We are here, mistress," said the man leading the horses. Slowly you stepped outside. The cold hit you like a brick wall, but it was nowhere near as punishing as the eternal frost of Snezhnaya. You found yourself in a small Fatui encampment. There, a few agents had already prepared your mobile laboratory. They even had a few disabled Ruin Guard pieces laid out for you already. Other than that, you were on your own, as the agents, with the exception of 2 heavily armed skirmishers, soon left. The 2 large men were quite boring to be around. They were quiet, only left the camp to hunt for food or to help you gather more Ruin Guard pieces. But most of the time, you were left alone working. Once per week, one of the agents would return to the camp to collect your reports or any special discoveries, in addition to deliver you assignments you needed to fulfill until the next return, or else. You took the or else as serious as you could, but at the same time couldn't help and occasionally thinking that it was a little childish. Today had been a slow day, already having fulfilled this week's duty. The 2 knuckleheads you were with also went into town, so you didn't even have company. Out of sheer boredom, you grabbed a second coat and decided Today would be the day you explored the Dragonspine mountain all on your own. You had your delusion, so surely no hilly troll could best you. And the few bands of treasure hoarders would run as soon as they saw your Fatui mask. They were bandits, not idiots after all. Slowly you crawled along the mountainside. Strangely enough, ever since you came to Dragonspine, the weather had been quite calm. The wind seemed to refuse to blow. But now that you were walking on ice-covered rocks, there was a breeze slowly picking up. Gritting your teeth after a gust of wind almost threw you off balance, you loudly growled, "Yes, I hate you too," at the wind, as if nature itself was making fun of you. The next hit of cold air finally managed to make you slip. You screamed as the slippery ground was replaced with nothingness. As if time itself had slowed down, you watched the small rock formation you had just walked upon move away from you. Out of sheer panic, you embraced your delusion, begging it to do anything to save you. The stone glowed yellow for only a split second before your body shattered on the hard ground. The darkness that surrounded you was endless, all-consuming. Did you die? No. The release of death surely would feel more accommodating. Besides, you didn't believe in an afterlife. Curious. You desperately wished for a pen and paper to note down every feeling, thought, and experience you are making right now. Dottore certainly would find it, at the very least, an interesting read. On second thought, he may decide to try and send you back here on his behalf to study it further. And then, just as quickly as you entered the void, your body ached. Bones cracking, but seemingly nothing broken. You could feel mist coming out of your mouth, but it didn't feel that cold. A quiet hum came from somewhere. Cautiously, you opened one eye. Wherever you were, it was dark, cold and damp. The noise was coming from a dark silhouette that stood hunched over something. You blinked, your eyes adjusting to this new level of darkness. A cave, you thought. Shelves aligned its walls. They were filled with things you couldn't quite make out in the pale darkness. Then you looked towards where the only light was coming from, and you needed to suppress a frightened shout. A wall of white snow. Crap, you huffed quietly, but that already was loud enough to alert the silhouette. Seems our sleeping beauty has awoken. Then they huffed, amused at their own joke. It was a male voice. So much for kissing you awake. They seeped cuss. They were seeping sarcasm. Then they stepped closer and kneeled down next to you. You've been hogging my field bed for a while. I was afraid I'd need to sleep on the ground. They began to fiddle with something on their back, and then placed it on your chest. It was a vision, a Geo one. After it was removed from the man's clothes and directly touched by him, it began to faintly glow. It created enough light for you to make out who was kneeling next to you. He was quite handsome. Ash blonde hair, blue eyes, and skin as white as chalk. My name is Albedo, Chief Alchemist of the Knights of Favonius. A light smirk appeared on his lips. And you, Sleeping Beauty, are Fatui's stray that caused me so much trouble. You scoffed and looked away. Don't be on the defense. Your little shriek may have caused this avalanche that now threatens to kill us with boredom. But is this really how you want to treat the man who saved your life? You puffed up your cheeks in resistance. Tisk, tisk. Did he really have to say it like that? I have a few questions. You better answer, as our survival is dependent on that. If it was so serious, why was he still smirking? Go ahead, you growled. Okay, little stray. Here's the quick rundown. I always have enough food for 8 days in my secret lab. Though this cave was his Dragonspine laboratory, good to know. It should take whoever finds us a day to dig through that. He pointed at the snow-covered entrance. We are slowly dying of hypothermia, and my assistant Sucrose won't get worried and call the Knights for a rescue mission for at least 3 days, maybe 4. You blinked, and you barked. And what I'd like to know is when the Fatui will get worried and will launch a rescue attempt themselves. You slowly exhaled. All things considered, you weren't that important. But then you remembered the 2 broods who lived with you. What did they say they were doing in Mondstadt again? And then the realization hit you like the hammer of a skirmisher. You sighed. 6. Albedo blinked. 6 days? You nodded. He sighed. And I thought you Lawrence people learned your lesson when it comes to dealing with bad people. It took you an unreasonable amount of determination to not spit in his face. What's that, Stray? He asked mockingly. How do you know I'm a Lawrence? Albedo shook his head. That posh look on your face, not to mention your facial characteristics, are of that of the Lawrence family. Plus, he pointed at your stomach, you have the Lawrence emblem tattooed there. You blushed hard. How do you know that? I needed to check for wounds. So he saw you naked. Great. You blushed hard, and he sat down on the ground next to you. Luckily, your fake vision softened your fall by creating a pillar. Sure, it wasn't that much of a softer landing, but it certainly lessened the blow on your body. You turned your head. You saw it? He nodded. I was wondering who was screaming like that. He looked up at you, his smirk getting wider. And then I saw you falling right in front of my cave. I carried you inside, only to then hear the mountain rumble. And the rest of the story, well, you can quite literally see by looking outside. You sighed. The problem, he said, won't be the food, though, he said. It will be heat. This place won't suffer oxygen loss, surely, but we also can't light a fire. You guessed as much. I hope you are ready for a very long and boring discussion about anything, really. This had quickly turned into a disaster. You were stuck with the alchemist for almost a week, and every day the temperature in the cave got colder and colder. On the 3rd day you had given up. Albedo wasn't such a bad guy after all, so in an attempt to stay warm you had gotten closer to him. At least 3 layers of blankets were draped over the 2 of you. your knees pulled up under your chin. "I'd love to start a campfire," you stuttered. "Yeah, that would be nice." While both of you were walking encyclopedias, most knowledge you had was the same as his, so the scientific exchange only lasted for the first 2 days, and none of you had the proper people skills to start a regular conversation now. Also, by now it was getting so cold you were beginning to feel warm. There was one thing you two still could do in an attempt to stay warm, but you had second thoughts about it. You looked at him. He had thrown his hood over his head, and the rest of his body was covered in the blankets the two of you were using. Judging by his movements, you could see that he was rapidly rubbing his hands together to create friction. With a helpless smile, you stared at a bottle of wine that was sitting somewhere on one of the shelves. "I know it will make it worse," you mumbled, "but I could really go for some dandelion wine right now." Albedo chuckled. "Yeah, maybe when we're out of this. I really don't want nature to win this fight." You raised an eyebrow. "Huh?" He forced a smile. Everything in nature, alchemy, science, and technology, bend it to their will. Animals are incapable of using it, ergo, they're human tools. He huffed. "Nature currently tries to kill us, little stray, so I say, fuck nature. Let's do science." Of course, Albedo didn't believe half of what he just said. He actually loved nature a lot. He just wanted to motivate you a little. And considering that you were Fatui, putting an enemy in front of you, well, that seemed to be what was helping the most. Yet there was still desperation in his voice. Shakily, your hand reached towards his back. "Huh?" was the only noise he was giving off. I want to try something." You rolled onto his lap, pressing your body against his while gently pushing your lips onto his. But after only a short moment he pushed you off. No, he said. "I know what you're thinking, but don't." Despite him refusing, he didn't push you off his lap. "If we do this, it's going to have the same effect as alcohol." Sighing, you admitted defeat, but you remained on top of him. The warmth he was giving you in this position, feeling very comforting. You set your head on his shoulder. "You're right," you muttered. "Sorry." After a while of silence, he groaned. Hypothetical question. Was that just now desperation or need?" You didn't answer immediately. "Both." It was interesting how being stuck and forced to be together so close could create certain feelings or needs. "It's funny," he mumbled. "If we met under any other circumstance, we would have killed each other. And now..." He sighed. "Just one more day." He repeated the sentence. "One more day." You both were going in and out of conscious over the next day, so both of you barely managed to realize that help had finally arrived. Sucrose, Albedo's assistant, had discovered the avalanche and launched an all-out rescue mission, led by the acting Grandmaster Jean. Everyone was surprised to see a Fatui in the alchemist's arms, but despite that, still grateful to the Archons that both of you survived. You were transported to the Grand Gulf Hotel, where the Fatui took you in. A man named Victor helped you recover. Since then, 3 months had passed. You had finished your investigation without any additional incident. The results were disappointing. As it turns out, the real reason you were sent here was simply to make sure if there was a Runeguard factory hidden in Dragonspine or not. This revelation upset you deeply, but not enough to start shouting at your superiors. On one of your last days in Mondstadt before being deported back to Il Dottore, however, you had made a decision for yourself. Putting on the full Fatui mask, you proceeded towards Albedo's home, a bottle of dandelion wine in your right hand. You knocked twice, and a minute later he opened. Is that you, Stray?" he asked bluntly. You nodded. "Heaven thank you for saving my life." You looked at the ground ashamed. This had to happen. Then you held up the bottle of wine. He swiftly took it, turned around for a moment, looking into his main laboratory, then back to you. "Sucrose isn't here," he said. "Do you want to come in?" You nodded quietly. He sat you down at his dinner table. Albedo's home was sparsely decorated. Aside from paintings and painting tools, there were alchemy machines, vials, and ingredients scattered in various shelves. The place smelled amazing, though, like a Sumero spice market. He placed a glass before you and filled it up before sitting down opposite to you. "Cheers," he said and smiled. The wine bottle was emptied quickly, and the less wine was in it, the more comfortable both of you became, despite not exchanging words. But eventually you couldn't keep your mouth shut. "I have to admit something to you, Albedo." He tilted his head. "Go ahead. I came here for more than just the wine." In your head you added, "But it certainly helped making up my mind." You loosened one of the buttons on your coat, revealing just enough of your skin to show that under it, you were completely naked. Albedo put a hand on his chin and thought. "So that wasn't a dream, huh?" Admittedly, I was kinda drifting. You blushed hard and looked away. "So you don't want to?" Your question showed both the embarrassment you felt, but also a slight disappointment. He grinned. "Well, I certainly didn't expect it." Then he folded his hands on his chin. "But it is a welcome one." He winked. Then you both stood up simultaneously. And while you were shedding the shell of clothing you wore, he dropped his white coat on the ground and opened his belt until your bodies crashed into each other. Hungrily you began to kiss the alchemist, still tasting the wine on his tongue. He growled like a savage beast as his hands began to dig into your supple flesh. The slight pain making you elicit pleasured moans. His tongue was unnaturally long and strong. Easily it overpowered yours, making any resistance pleasurable yet futile. You could feel one of his hands reach down from your chest towards your temple. Groaning, you slowly began to push him towards his bed, sitting him down on it before kneeling in front of him and pulling his pants off. He smiled. "You did this before, didn't you?" he asked mockingly. You simply smiled. A Fatui never gives up their secrets.